At this point, I would like to call on Billy Bonavie to read a work by Binar Sarkar Elias.
Yeah, this is a poem made by Bina Sarkar Elias. We sent her photos of the work of Agnes, and she was also familiar because she published a magazine entitled International Gallery, and that featured Filipino artists. In the warehouse of my bones. In the warehouse of my bones is the universe, planets, stars, constellations, swirling dervishes that live beneath and beyond the earthly skin. In the warehouse of my bones is a soul seeking realms outside the bazaar of daily life, seeking hopeful chrysanthemums in barren fields. The warehouse of my bones is a song, a mystic melody of blackest and light. A symphony of temporal and infinite. In the warehouse of my bones is a sage who knows life is a mercurial river that runs dry, who knows the wings of transience will always fly.
So hi, good afternoon and welcome to Ateneo Art Gallery, to our first online ArtSpeak. Thank you for joining us today, this afternoon, Thursday, July 9. This is definitely a first for most of us, indeed a better normal for you as attendees because you don't have to worry about driving to the Ateneo de Manila campus. A new normal for us, the Ateneo Art Gallery team, and also for our featured artist, Agnes Arellano. This ArtSpeak was set for March 28th to mark what was supposed to be the last week of Agnes's exhibition, Inscapes, under the Ignacio B. Jimenez Outdoor Installation Grant Program. The March event was also intended to coincide with another exhibition by Agnes titled Sacred Feminine, which was organized by the Ateneo Library for Women Writers, or ALiWW, with its director, Isa Nazareno. She will give more information on that project later. But obviously, since March, the works on exhibit have also been on lockdown. Today's ArtSpeak marks the launch of two collateral projects. The first is a zine, which is what I'm holding now. This contains poetry of some of Agnes's friends, as well as creative writing students here in Ateneo. The event was titled Sculpture Speak and was held last November 26. This was facilitated by Carlo Mardoana, a professor of the Fine Arts Department. Earlier, you saw an excerpt from that event with Billy Bonavie reading a poem written by Bina Sarkar Elias titled In the Warehouse of My Bones. The zine also includes poetry by Marnie Quilates and Muki Katigbak La Cuesta. Today, we're also launching a virtual tour of Agnes's exhibitions, which we are happy to share. This may be accessed anytime through the Ateneo Art Gallery website. You will be viewing this virtual tour now. as the artist reads the introductory notes to be followed by an annotation by Isa Nazareno.
Inscape, an interior configuration of the mind, a complex of intellectual and affective elements, as distinguished from landscape, which is an exterior view perceived by the senses. Words by Alice Guillermo. The word inscape was taken from poetic parlance to refer to the underlying design of an object, which gives it coherence. By fragmenting, overlapping, and joining words, an internal unity, the essence, is revealed. A parallel in the visual arts is the surrealist approach, which juxtaposes disparate elements to create a third meaning. For me, inscape is a spatial device that aims to change the way we are accustomed to viewing sculpture, which is a 360-degree circling around an object. In an inscape, one walks into the sculpture, surrounded by several diverse pieces on the floor, freestanding, on the walls, or hanging from the ceiling, or invisibly by sound. One gleans the underlying meaning of the installation. He gestalts it. This retrospective exhibit recombines pieces culled from several inscapes that I created from 1983 to 1996. I look back at 36 years of practice, retracing my life's journey through healing and illness, love and loss, from early motherhood to the midlife crisis. They are all in white cold cast marble, suitable for outdoor exposure, and chosen to best simulate the white of the originals, which were done using the techniques of live casting and direct modeling in plaster of Paris, using plaster as modeling clay.
Sorry.
Many of the pieces are cast from my own body, a technique which has blurred the distinction between reality and art, as they are fantasy self-portraits done in specific points in my life as a psychological processing of my experience at the time. Dwelling on the themes of the sacred feminine, eros, and paradoxes of life and death, male and female, yabyum, yin and yang, I have drawn inspiration from comparative mythology, archaeology, psychology, shamanism, and other religious systems. In the Arete outdoor coves, these temple fragments can be viewed all together for the first time. One can walk through them in a Zen garden ambiance, free from walls and open to the sky.
This year, the Ateneo Library of Women's Writings celebrates its 25th year anniversary. Established to procure, preserve, and promote the contributions of Filipino women from all fields, the archival collections include materials from several notable women artists. The Natividad Galang Fajardo lectures and exhibits take place through the support provided by one of our benefactors, Mr. Ed Fajardo, in memory of his mother, Natividad. The endowment was established in 2001 to recognize women visual artists, with its first honoree being sculptor Julie Luch. This year, and also in celebration of Women's Month, it is fitting that the 15th honoree is another sculptor, Agnes Arellano. The archetype of sacred feminine, also the title of the exhibit, represents a core theme explored in her works. This special archival exhibit showcases stages from her notebooks, models, and maquettes from her studio, ordinarily unseen by the public. Some of these were realized in the sculptures shown earlier in inscape. This exhibit marks Agnes's inclusion in the roster of women with collections in the Ateneo Library of Women's Writings through her generous donation of materials that include notes, journals, and other documents of her work as artist. The collections are open to researchers who would like to know more about these notable women.
Thank you, Isa and Agnes, for that opening segment. So Agnes Arellano is one of the leading sculptors in the country, and she began her art practice in the 1980s, at a time when sculpture was even more marginalized than today. It only had a few practitioners, and they were mostly male artists. Agnes earned a degree in psychology at the University of the Philippines in 1971 and continued to enroll in graduate units in clinical psychology in Ateneo de Manila University. Later that decade, after returning from her travels in Europe, she pursued a fine arts degree which she completed in 1981 from the University of the Philippines. When we offered her the outdoor installation grant last year, I was very pleased that she decided to show the series of works she refers to as inscapes. The 14 works or so may seem like a seamless group on site, but these have different but related contexts. Today, she will be sharing the origins of some of these projects that span for almost 4 decades and turning points in her life as an artist, a woman, and a mother. So, Agnes, can we start your slide presentation?
This is Gallery 1 of the Temple of the Moon Goddess. Okay, well, this is my signature. The third A is for Almario, my middle name. It is what I carve into my sculpture. Okay. This is the Temple to the Moon Goddess, an inscape of 24 pieces in plaster, elements of a temple spread out in 2 galleries at the Museum of Philippine Art in 1983. It's my homage to the female principle in religion and the start of my lifelong search for the sacred feminine, an alternative deity to the white god of our colonizers. Here we see hermaphroditic homunculus, the same welcome arch that we have seen in the retrospective. It is derived from a neurological diagram that shows how much brain power is needed to move the different parts of the body. The thumb is the biggest because it is used for prehensile movement or grasping. We pass through and under this arch to reach the altar on the floor. Halia bathing. Halia is based on the Bicol myth of the moon goddess who would come down periodically to earth to bathe in our warm waters. As myths go, this is the ancient explanation for menstruation. This is also based on the universal myth of sky maidens, aliens from outer space who come down to visit us. The story goes that Halia was spotted in the sacred stream by a local woodsman who discovered that her clothes were her vehicle to and from the moon. So first he hides her clothes, woos her, and wins her, and here she is back in the sacred stream, contemplating on the figure of the demigod inside her. Her bed of crushed marble is raked to simulate ripples in the water, as inspired by the dry gardens of Ryoanji in Kyoto. This is the casting of Halia. On the left, we can see the upper torso. I had pre-existing casts of the upper body. On top of this, I modeled the pregnant belly and part of the face using oil-based modeling clay or plasticine. This mound is varnished so that the next layer of plaster will not adhere to the clay. I then placed my hand on top of the mound to be cast again, as if she's feeling her belly. This is the process of live casting, a shortcut, much like photocopying. This is Gallery 2 of the Temple of the Moon Goddess. Flanking the white tray on the floor are a couple of unborn caryatids, inspired by Michelangelo's slaves, their bodies struggling to free themselves from the marble block. Further down are 4 hooded guardians, derived from Nuno sa Punso of Philippine folklore. They have features like a beak that tears flesh apart, breasts that spurt out poisoned milk, hands like claws that pluck out eyes, and a belly that emits a deadly fart. This shows me installing music for watching the moon rise at the exhibition set up at the MOPA. This is sculpture that composes music. The tray, a sandbox, is the musical staff with the usual 5 lines and 4 spaces. The 3 inner lines are raked. The notes are in the shape of omphalos. The music is created when the omphalos notes are positioned from a purely visual point of view. I imagined them as domes in the desert lit up by the light of the full moon. The resulting arrangement is transcribed into a music sheet, which I asked my brother Deo to play on his flute. The accidental melody can be heard on flute, was heard earlier during the virtual walkthrough. There's a strong echo. Da, 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 da. This is recumbent Yabium sarcophagus. At the end of the hall, this is the Sanctum Sanctorum. If Gallery 1 was about life, Gallery 2 is about death. Yabium is Tibetan for father, mother, a couple in erotic embrace. I used this image as the altar for Gallery 2. I was told that this was how my parents were found after the fire that devoured our ancestral home in 1981. Their innards were still intact. At the back of the woman is a glass panel, much like the view window on a coffin. Through this glass, one will see skeletons in embrace. These are real bones, skeletons which I got from the Cementerio del Norte. In the box are 2 silver goblets, a vase, and other objects salvaged from the ashes. To further ritualize their death, I sprinkled ochre and red puja powder on this pile. This ritual act provided some form of closure for me for the death by fire of my parents and sister in 1981. This piece is the last work in the temple to the moon goddess. This is another inscape, Myths of Creation and Destruction 1. This photo shows how they were exhibited at the 5th Havana Biennale in Cuba. This particular inscape only has 2 pieces, carcass cornucopia and music for making the sun rise, which we also heard earlier. It's the same music composed by sculpture, but this time using skulls as notes. This is carcass cornucopia. On one level, this is the myth of the origin of the universe by the explosion of the first bovine. The head became the sun, the feet became the peasant class, etc. On another historical level, it is the waning of the matriarchy and the advent of the patriarch, personified and symbolized as a bulol, a guardian of the grain from the Cordilleras. On yet another level, it is an expression of the pain that I suffered from a botched cesarean operation. This is my body. To get the real feeling, I hung myself upside down, as the Polaroids show. That also gave the necessary sag of the flesh from the effect of gravity. The boobs especially look very different from when one is standing upright. On the left, the photos of the beast being disgorged and its empty carcass became my body. Indeed, I felt slaughtered, slashed, gashed when my cesarean wound opened up in the middle of the night and my belly was oozing like a fountain of blood and pus. And yet, on the other hand, behold the new life. From destruction comes new creation. Yin, yang, polarity, duality. You cannot know joy if you haven't been sad. From the explosion, the belly spills out the bounty of the universe. Spheres and eggs and fruit-like shapes and a mound of palay or unhusked rice. And with the half-buried skulls on the ground, new life in the form of music. This is the all-seeing eye of Shiva. We are about to enter the other side of Moon, the temple of the sun god, my homage to the male principle. Before the acolyte can enter the sun temple, he first has to pass through her. This portal is my distillation of the feminine. 2 giant clitoris shapes forming the sides of a Gothic arch. Further down, the walls are lined with Shiva masks, each one a cast of a horseshoe crab with a very realistic human eye in its center. Not far behind is the angel of death. To reach these doors, one has to pass between 2 columns of bronze bullets. each weighing 250 kilos of bronze. They are giant Armalite bullets. At the center of the door is a spear symbolizing Shiva's weapon of destruction. The angel of death hovers over mushrooms that mean death, that bring death. Death by the mushroom cloud of a nuclear explosion, and ego death by the ingestion of entheogenic mushrooms. The shards of green and brown broken glass at the top of the door are broken wine and beer bottles. They're an anti-burglar device which we used to have in our fence in the old house. The army. Here we are in the central shrine, guarded by the army. 2 columns of 7 pairs of phallic worshippers. At the far end is an altar. Here we can see the double-sided altar. You can also see a lust-crazed worshipper and 2 white circles on the wall. Here are the ayams, the female uncircumcised ones. At their back is an obelisk of skulls, which is also present in the retrospective show. It is another monument to death and destruction. A tender moment, the detonation of the bomb. On the front, here the left, is a mituna or loving couple in the act of creation. On their back is the Enola Gay icon, a replica in bronze of a shallow underwater explosion based on a book of photos from NASA. It is an early stage in the formation of a mushroom cloud. Eventually, the crown becomes the stem and the orb rises to become the mushroom cap. It's a reminder of the devastation that was wrought in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Here's a page from my notebook which reveals some research. I believe the ArtSpeak here is appropriation. I appropriated this image called Mituna or loving couple from an ancient Hindu temple. This may look like a page from the Zen teaching about the search for an ox, but it is really actually a direct imprint from our living room wall eroded by the fire in 1981. If fire can do this to concrete, what of human flesh? It's a very painful remembrance of the fire that consumed my parents and my sister Sita's. The next few slides will be of fantasy self-portraits. There are 4 of them in the exhibition. Images cast from my body at different milestones in my life. I think this is the healing that I have received from sculpture. The healing is shamanic, much like the making of a bulul. When a person is sick, a bulul is made to represent him. And through rituals, the illness is transferred from the patient to the bulul. When I cast my body, the hollow negative mold is filled with my spirit. And with the creation of the portrait, it takes me 1 step removed from the trauma. Okay, this is the triple goddess relief found at the top of the doorway in the temple to the moon goddess that leads to the sarcophagus. It is based on Robert Graves's paradigm in his book, The White Goddess, a historical grammar of poetic myth. Graves links that true poetry is based on a mother goddess archetype that lies behind the goddesses of European and pagan mythologies. Maiden, mother, crone. I used the mold of my face to make 3 faces of plasticine, and I remodeled them to show midlife and old age. "13 years after the relief came the 3-dimensional live cast female Buddhas. It was many years after the Buddha's death that there were Buddhist nuns, and when it was acknowledged that women can also attain Buddhahood. Meet Vesta, Dea, and Lola, ang tatlong Budang ina. This was commissioned for a show at the Asia Society in New York in 1996. I wrote then that, by casting real mothers, my aim is to bring the divine dimension back into the familiar human figure, to stress the need to search for the sacred in everyday life. Dea is my fantasy self-portrait at middle age. The number of mummeries refers to my 3 stepchildren and my own daughter. The cobra guards my cesarean scar, but also refers to the Muchi Linda. Dea's wings are clipped. She can no longer fly. At this point in life, after devoting oneself to husband and home, I asked myself, is there still a me? Hope lies in the skin that is molting. I will metamorphose into another self. These pages from my research notebook show Muchilinda, the serpent that protected the Buddha during a storm by coiling up underneath him to save him from the floodwaters and opening its hood to shield him from the rain. Also on the right page, a sketch of Gloria, the cobra that I took care of while making this piece. So another page from a notebook showing sources for the multi-breasted goddesses, Diana of Ephesus here, Mayawel from Mexico, and our very own Mibuyan are the sources. This is Eshu, another fantasy self-portrait. Eshu is Lord of the Crossroads in Cuban Santeria, the mediator between men and gods. Thus, he needed to retain the habits of alcohol and tobacco to be able to be on the same plane, same astral plane as humans. Eshu holds a trident to scoop up man's garbage. This is my body as Eshu, lying on a bed of volcanic cinder and surrounded by bubuli or garden lizards. In real life, I was quitting alcohol, hence the downturned bottle of wine. The cigar is a connection to Havana. On the other side, the trident has a heart that sprouts new life. It's made from a cast of the heart of a pig, which is the closest we can get to the size of a human heart. This is the live casting of Eshu. 2 friends plus an assistant are casting me with strips of gypsona. It is gauze that is impregnated with plaster. When you dip it in water, the plaster is activated and then laid in layers on the skin until a substantial thickness is achieved. It's the same material used for binding a broken arm, for example. My right hand is actually holding an empty bottle of Bordeaux, and my left hand is holding a rattan stick, which will eventually become Eshu's trident. Eshu was my last self-portrait, and she lies with Dea, looking at her from her pedestal in the retro exhibit. The next few slides are my work in progress. Project Pleiades, a quaternity of goddesses, 4 out of 7 sisters in the night sky, the star cluster Pleiades that is most visible to the naked eye. Using casts of my naked body to delve into comparative mythology and archetypal symbols. Their arms are in the Epiphany position. These first 4 were commissioned for a special exhibition at the art fair in 2016. They're made of cast stone and stained with tea, and placed in a darkened space with black walls. Behind each goddess is a yantra, or a cosmic diagram. They each have attributes that convey messages from the stars. From left to right, Inanna, the hooved cow goddess from Mesopotamia and Bagobo myth, Kali from ancient India, Magdalene from biblical times, and Dakini from Tantric Vajrayogini Buddhism. Project Pleiades 2 is in a wooded grove at the UP Diliman campus. It's part of LAWAS, meaning body, a public arts project for the UP Diliman Festival of Culture and the Arts in 2018. Here, the 4 have been coated with verdigris wax to make them blend with the leaves and the green of nature. Kali, Hindu goddess of time, death, and destruction, holds a Kalinga axe and the head of a poet, which is the head of my partner, Billy. She, on her left hand, she has the mudras, fear not, and generosity. On the right is Mary Magdalene, Christ's most beloved disciple. She is Isis reborn, a high priestess initiated in the ancient Egyptian mysteries. In her palms and her feet are the wounds of the crucifixion. And in her belly is the 3-month fruit of the Christ. They all have, these goddesses have all their third eye open. This is Dakini, Vajrayana. She's the female embodiment of enlightenment. On the right is Inanna, goddess of the underworld who feeds all the unborn children. I gave her the horns of a tamarau, which is also one of our advocacies to conserve the tamarau. This is the quaternity of goddesses at night. They have just descended from the sky, each with a message for us, earthlings. Project Pleiades hopes to reawaken the sacred feminine in all of us, to help us recall ancient values of nurturing, inclusivity, generosity, compassion, and caring. There is only one goddess, and she has many forms. In ancient Egypt, the word for temple was home. Here at the Arete, the temple remnants found a home.
Thank you, Agnes. Thank you for that very engaging, enlightening presentation. The other day when we were having the tech meeting, Isa and I were saying that how much we loved listening to the stories, how you were telling the background story for each of the work. And they were very engaging and passionate. And all the more now we understand how personal these works are, no? You also seemed like a seasoned Zoom presenter already. So we can do another one. Okay, so earlier I gave a brief overview of your educational background. And could you share with us some of the people who enriched your practice and helped you in finding finding the direction you have taken in your on your practice, no? So your mentors, if you will.
When I think of mentor, I immediately think of Bobby Chabet,
Mm-hmm.
who was my professor at the University of the Philippines Fine Arts, College of Fine Arts. He would make us think out of the box. The first person I encountered who fit that description out of the box.
Mm-hmm.
Another mentor was Alice Guillermo, who was my teacher in Oriental art. She turned us on to Zen flesh, Zen bones, and all of this Oriental mysticism.
Okay.
Another person I would look for and look up to when I needed inspiration was Pepito Bosch, the eccentric from Pasay. There are other sources, but for example, Carl Andre was a great influence on me in terms of you putting an altar on the floor, which
Right.
people actually step on. Because when I wasn't an artist yet, but when I did visit the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam,
Mm-hmm.
there was a booth that showed Carl Andre, equivalent 8. There was nothing. I thought maybe it's on loan to some other museum in Europe.
Uh-huh.
When I looked at the floor, there were 8 piles. There was a pile of industrial bricks.
Mm-hmm.
8 of this way and 8 that way. And I thought, boy, is this art? I think this guy is fooling me. So I walked towards the other pieces on the exhibit. And looking back, I was still saying, is this art? And I stumbled. I nearly fell on the floor and laid out before me on that is a huge installation of magnesium tiles, also by the same artist, Carla Andre. And that never left my mind.
Yeah, it makes sense because the way you would design or develop a project, no? It's not just about occupying a wall space or just the floor. It's really a holistic approach to experiencing the work. No? So would you like to go on with your other mentors or influences?
Of course, the fire was a very big thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And my psychology degree helped to process the trauma from that. There were travels. My partner Billy and I have taken pilgrimages to different sacred spots all over the world. And there's also the raking that I used for the music and Halia were direct appropriation from the Ryoanji garden, the dry garden in Kyoto. In Eastern mysticism, I was a hippie in the 60s. And that was the first time I got introduced to the ancient Chinese Book of Changes, or the I Ching, by the late poetess Betsy Romualdez Francia. Yeah, more or less.
Before we go on with the conversation, I'd like to remind the attendees you can participate by sending your questions in the Q&A box of the Zoom window. So we will be reading your questions later. No? Isa, would you like to ask your question?
My questions. Yes. So first of all, thank you to Boots and the Ateneo Art Gallery for having ALiWW join this activity, and to Agnes for sharing so much. So yeah, even if I heard some of the things you already said, kanina, it's still was very profound, I think. In preparing for the archival exhibit of ALiWW a few months ago, I had the privilege of visiting the home and the studio of Agnes, and it was really this like amazing place that was just full of stuff for little studies and models and maquettes everywhere. So one of my questions would be, how do you decide which of these experiments you have going, several at the same time, which of these becomes a finished sculpture? So in terms of the two exhibits discussed earlier, I think you have a few pieces in Sacred Feminine from that are maquettes of the pieces that were part of the army. So I think there were 3. You also had that triple goddess relief in the archival exhibit, which you showed in your slide. So how do you decide which becomes a finished sculpture?
Some maquette-sized pieces, when they're cast into bronze, become the finished sculpture. It's not always possible to transform the little ones into huge ones with problem of space, no?
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes they need to stay that way.
Mm-hmm.
But I also have a lot of maquettes because I don't draw very much. When I need to envision something in my head, I automatically turn to clay and start molding with my hands instead of turning to pencil and paper.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's how it works.
Yeah, maybe as a follow-up, because you mentioned sort of the beginning of your process that you're making these little 3D models. So could you elaborate a bit more? So you said you start with clay. How do you choose what the medium of the finished work will be?
In the beginning, the medium of the finished work was always plaster of Paris because I used that as clay. In the beginning, I wasn't even using clay except for plasticine, which is the oil-based clay. But if your work has to travel abroad, plaster will not withstand the travel. When it's cracked, when you get to the other side, you're unable to fix it or repair it because the moisture will show that where you put new plaster onto old plaster, there's a clear distinction between wet and dry. What else? Yeah, so they become transferred into polymer resin, which is a synthetic poisonous medium, which I have stopped using. That's why I switched to cast stone, which is also as supposed to be, if you cure it properly, can be used as a building material, construction material for outdoors. Yeah, that's it. The bullets, the giant Armalite bullets, were just enlarged from actual Armalite bullets. It was raining bullets in the house during a coup at the time, and I was telling my daughter, "No, don't play under the skylight, Nishka, don't play under the skylight." And we saw these bullets outside and on our roof, and that's when the whole vision came to me, that how big the bullet was in my life, how life-threatening it was.
Maybe we should clarify some points that Agnes mentioned. Raining bullets. This was during this would be late 80s, right? When there were a series of coups soon after the EDSA revolution. 80s, 90s, early 90s, perhaps.
86 daw eh.
86. Okay. So it was soon after. It was during the EDSA revolution.
But there were other coups after.
Yes, after. Right. And because Agnes's house is actually somewhere in Blue Ridge, which is very near Camp Aguinaldo, no?
Yeah.
Sige, siguro in relation to what Isa asked, no? Why are you drawn more to plaster as a medium than to other materials like wood or metal? What are the qualities and modes of working with that medium that are consistent with your subject or your ideas?
Wood you carve.
Yes.
There is an extension from the mind to the
Mhm.
hand to the tool.
Mhm.
But when you work with clay or plaster as clay, it's direct. I'm a very tactile person. If I need to see that a work is finished or if it is smooth enough, I actually close my eyes and I feel it. That is my gauge. My hands are my measure for whether a work is refined or not.
Mhm.
Did I answer the question?
Yeah. And you did mention Abueva was also one of your mentors in terms of training you in sculpture making, no? You also, I just want also to mention that I earlier I said that you were one of the few sculpture majors at the University of the Philippines, and most of your batchmates are actually men, no? And but looking at one of the photos that you showed, they helped you, assisted you in doing direct body cast. No, what was I was just trying to parang imagine if I were a fly on the wall. What were those guys thinking? I guess because you were already very good friends, no? With Dudley, of course. Dudley Diaz
Yeah,
was there.
he was like 30 years in Florence, but now he lives in the US. We
Mm-mm.
were like batchmates.
Yes.
Although he's much younger than me, because yeah, I went through psychology before joining these people
Uh-uh.
in fine arts. Abueva, you mentioned, yeah,
Mhm.
he was my teacher, but I think he only came twice to
Ah,
our
okay.
classes. And it was Mulawin, his son,
Mhm.
who actually taught me the actual casting into bronze
Ah,
for the
okay.
first time.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
And my other classmates, Tito Sanchez, Dan Raralio, they were all
Mm.
very helpful because you know UP the teachers hardly come. So we still
Ala, quiet.
teach each other. I mean, that's my experience, right?
Uh-uh. I
Yeah.
think
For
now mas
example,
strict
one
sila.
teacher told us to use when we do live casting to use Band-Aid, which was horrible. And it was just our own experience. We tried paper and eventually we came up with tissue paper
Mhm.
and we came up with better face masks. Yeah, friends, fellow students.
Yeah. Isa, let me just go to some questions in
Sure,
the
sure.
Q&A box. There's a question here, and we're very happy that we have a number of art teachers in the audience, and they're asking questions, especially now because they need to prepare new learning modules for online teaching, and it's also a similar direction where we are taking. So, Miss Monette Detor, her question is, it's also related to a question I wanted to ask, but let me ask this. I'm a senior high school teacher, no, senior high teacher. We intend to discuss your artworks and show them to grade 11 students. So grade 11 would be around what age? Isa, would you remember? That
Grade 11
would be
is like
16,
third
no?
year high school.
16,
Probably,
17.
yeah.
Could you recommend, the question is, could you recommend a way to present them and the process of making them, to prepare them to see genitals? So I think yung, I think it's similar to, remember, when we just opened the exhibition here in the amphitheater, and you had there was a time when a group of students were around and you were you guided them, you gave a walkthrough. Yeah, so
Yeah.
what would you advise teachers on how they would discuss works like yours? No, not only you, of course. No, other artists have used the the form of human body parts, the genitalia, as part of their vocabulary of imagery.
How would I prepare them?
Mm-mm.
I think I would get shocked because I wouldn't know how to prepare them. I think that's up to sex education. Um, I'm not. I don't think they need to be prepared because
Mm-mm.
everybody has the same sexual organs,
Mm-mm.
and if you present it in a way that is not lewd,
Yes.
in a way that is artful, i.e., beautiful, then the pornography is erased.
Mm.
There is
Mm-mm.
no lewd thought. The gods did not understand lewdness or
Or
pornography.
malice. Yeah.
These are human values. These are
Mm-mm.
human
Mm-mm. Yeah.
tendencies.
And I think that that goes back to the context, no, the stories that inspire your works, because these deities or gods were not clothed, no. So it was not an issue. So I guess that would be part of the answer, no.
I guess
Going back to the context.
one way also of preparing them is to show classical sculpture,
Mm-mm.
Michelangelo, and
Yeah.
all this. Then it will not be so hee, you know.
And also Oriental sculptures, no, or sculptures in temples here in Southeast Asia, no, where you have this
Bulol,
very erotic imagery, which is part of the belief, no.
we even have bulols that have the vagina being open and the
Mm-mm.
head of the child is coming out. These are ancient things that we're only queasy about it because of
Mm-mm.
our education.
Yeah.
But I think, yeah, one way of preparing is to show art that has used these images before,
Mm-hmm. Mm-mm.
from ancient times.
Mm-hmm. Isa,
Maybe
would you like?
Boots, yeah.
Yes.
Since you mentioned the body, maybe one way also of approaching, I was thinking, explaining it to students would be from that perspective. Why did you choose to use your body? Your works in a lot of ways seem to be literally like an out of body experience.
Mm-mm.
So was it a form of catharsis also? And I was wondering, what do you see when you look at your own artworks? Is there a distance that you experience when you look at it, or is there that still that sense of immediacy that you relate to certain experiences?
Oh, like I explained how healing takes place when I make a fantasy self-portrait.
Mm.
The art object becomes detached from me. It stops being me. Although I know it was me, I'm like one step away from it. And well, I don't feel that the passion anymore. The passion comes with the making of it and the conceptualization. But once it's there, not
It's
me.
released.
Yeah,
It's
I'm
out there
not
now.
embarrassed about people looking at my vagina on issue, for example.
Okay. Sige. Here's another question. A comment first, no, from Dre Bye Bye. Very inspiring narratives. I was amazed with the idea of awakening the inner feminine in all of us. Can this be performed in dance or performance art? I don't know exactly what he was referring to. And then he goes on by saying, also another concept that struck me was the floor installation that produces sound. I personally quoted it as from visual to auditory. Are there other methods that a single art form for example, architecture, can be produced into other forms like dance, theater, music?
One of my works not featured in the retrospective is called Bosch and the Hollow Men, which was a tribute to the Pepito Bosch and Hieronymus Bosch, the anti-cleric painter in the 16th century.
Yeah.
That was made into a dance with Denise Reyes choreographing it.
Maybe I can show it.
Yes.
Yeah.
He used the actual figures on stage alongside with dancers who were wearing all white. And eventually the dancers started moving, differentiating them from the still and unmoving sculpture. Yeah, it was a bit difficult to recreate on stage, but I think Denisa succeeded quite well. The collaboration into dance.
Yeah. Well, in relation to that I'd like to note also that you are, of course, a very musical person. You come from a musical family. You sing. No, your daughter is a singer, and play the ukulele. And you're a regular participant in the Malasimbo Art and Music Festival. No? So, and you've done art installations with them, no, in the past. Yep. Okay. Sige. Let's go to the next question. Mel Gadi writes. Sorry. Yes. You want to add?
Hi to Mel.
Okay. So you know her. What was your hardest challenge as a sculptress? Pero I think sculptor is fine, no? Kasi generic. What was your hardest challenge that you went through?
Maybe it was making my father's portrait after he died. Because I remember when he was alive, I'd hold his face in my hands. I wanted to do a sculpture way before. So I'd feel the jaw, chin. And when he died, I needed to make this. So I would do it, and then I couldn't see. I really couldn't see. And I realized it was because of the tears. So it helped me at the same time. It was the most difficult piece I think I ever did. I was rewarded when the architect, national artist Lindy Locsin commented that, because he knew my father. They were both in I remember your father, when I was telling him, I was asking him to be the president of the United Architects. He went really pensive like this. And that was how the sculpture appealed to him. I think, that was probably the most difficult. In terms of emotional.
Yeah.
But
in terms of as a practice.
The casting upside down of
cornucopia
was very, very difficult.
But in terms of how do you call it? You're engaging with the audience or with the art community and art market. Were there challenges? Any, or you just had to deal with it?
In the beginning, it was difficult. I remember at the Museum of Philippine Art when we opened, there was a man who was incredulous that a woman could have created this whole temple. And he was sitting beside, on the floor beside Halia, and he had stuck his paper napkin and a flower that he took from the flower arrangement, stuck it right there where the legs were open. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe this vandal.
Yeah.
He couldn't believe
that you did.
So, well, eventually there were less and less people like that with that machismo attitude. relating to the art community was not so difficult because when I do images, I normally get archetypes which are common to all of humanity. So there's an unconscious level in all of us, the collective unconscious, that I like to draw from. So for example, when I showed the music for making the sun rise in South Africa, Johannesburg, some people commented that it was the killing fields in Cambodia, which was fine because they're relating to it.
Right.
So you get the basic human level that people can relate to, the archetype.
Okay. Another question from Robert Alejandro.
Oh yeah.
Yes. Hi, Robert. When you started as a sculptor, ma'am.
Ma'am.
Sorry, I read another ano pala. When you started as a sculptor, where did you learn the skill? What would you recommend to someone who would like to get into sculpture and public art? I think partly you answered that with well, of course, your experience at the UP College of Fine Arts. Are there any other?
As a child, I was already making little dolls out of yarn, and
Oh, really? Oh, I didn't know that. Good to know.
and bunnies out of old socks, used socks.
So it was really you're really a very tactile person, no?
Yeah.
Talagang that's how you that's your mode
I
of
was a
practice.
nail biter, and my father would show me the small replica of Venus de Milo.
Yep.
He would tell me, you know why her arm is cut? Because she's biting and biting her nails. So yeah, it's normal for someone with a fixation here. Hands. One very good thing is to try using putik or clay, water-soluble clay, not the plasticine one. Although that's okay too. Because even now, some psychologists have been using that to eliminate writer's block, for example. Or I once had some seminars with mother-daughter pairs, and we would immediately just get hold of the clay and see whatever comes out is important. It doesn't have to be art.
Yeah.
It's whatever you do with your hand. It's a way of starting. You don't right away copy the face of somebody. You know? You have to feel how you like it, how it goes with your hand, how when you press it gives an indentation. Yeah.
And since Robert Alejandro asked that question, I would say that it's similar to how you would do your doodles, how natural it seemed for you to do that. Okay, another, let me just, would like to ask you. Okay, so from Daisy Joy Guevara, I'm amazed by your artworks, ma'am. Siya yung nag-ma'am. Thank you for sharing all these. But I would like to ask, what piece of art that symbolizes your healing? Which of the works do you think really symbolizes that healing process for you? Or maybe
The
there
four
would be more than one.
self-portraits are direct interventions into traumatic experiences, processing from a psychological point of view. No, there's another inscape that wasn't featured here, which is Fire and Death ritual, which my brother and I did together. We created a labyrinth, and each dead end was a philosophical dissertation. Together, we were able to process the guilt and the sadness, the grief that we felt from my house and our parents burning down.
Because both your parents died in that fire, plus together with your sister, no? This is an older sister?
Yes, she's the middle sibling between Ani Karandang and me. Was Titas, Felicitas. When she was married, she was Reyes, Felicitas.
I'm just browsing through your book. This is your father's portrait, no? Yeah. Okay. A question from our dear friend, my former teacher, Diana Ongpin. Can you tell us, nasa na, nawala na.
Dea.
Sorry, nawala. Ayun. Can you tell us how and when? This is the same question that I was thinking of asking. Can you tell us how and when your art started to become infused with Hindu and Buddhist iconography?
How and when?
Or what? Was it? How early did you start being drawn to?
From the moon goddess, we already had something Hindu there, didn't we?
Yeah.
But this is partly because having been exposed to Oriental mysticism, which began with the I Ching, the Oracle of Changes, and then led on to Zen, care of Alice, Zen flesh, Zen bones. And then as hippies, we also tried going into Krishna, although they were not encouraging the women to join. And I joined Ananda Marga at some point, and I was given this mantra, which you weren't supposed to tell anyone unless you want to lose the efficacy of it. That's in the 60s. Before I was doing art, I was already searching for an alternative deity. I was feeling oppressed as a female in this society by a church which had relegated Magdalene into a whore when she was actually initiated in the ancient mysteries of Egypt. Things like this, I would constantly feel being downgraded because I'm a female, I'm a woman, girl. Eastern Hindu. Does that answer something?
Yeah, I think it does. No? And I think it also relates to one comment we were talking about during the tech talk, tech meeting. Would you consider yourself as a feminist? Maybe you can answer that later, or would you like to say something? Let me just go through another question. Wait, I can't. This is actually this is a question from a comment and question from Maricel Montero, Mamu, of Museum Pambata. By the way, Museum Pambata used to be the Museum of Philippine Art. So the space, those rooms, those galleries that Agnes walked us through, those are actually rooms in what used to be Museum of Philippine Art, which is now Museum Pambata. So I love the sacred feminine, and I learned so much from you. Beautiful stories. Are there any goddesses that you want to do? Other goddesses that are still in the works you want to develop?
There are 3 more goddesses missing from the Pleiades project. So the way it works is they come to me. The image comes to me. I don't really search for it anymore. I think it's when somebody asks me if there's a way to solve the problems in the country, I sort of just gave up and said, I think the answer will come from the stars. So in a similar way, the idea comes to me
when it's time.
and then I execute it. So it's like a message.
Yeah.
I guess maybe I need to do something for Corona.
It will come.
Corona or something. There are 3 more that will come.
Why do you say 3 more?
Because there are 7 sisters in Pleiades.
Okay.
In the star cluster there.
Oh, right.
It's
So
about
it's
them.
the constellation.
7 sisters came down to Earth,
Mm-hmm.
and Halia got left behind.
Mm.
So in Malasimbo, I had three heads with protuberances that indicate that they're aliens from outer space coming down. So there were three of, I have Halia on the
floor.
flat side of the hill, and another
Mhm.
climbing part coming down are three figures with the protuberances. That's when I first thought, the sisters are coming back for Halia. So
Okay.
in Pleiades, the myth goes that when Halia's daughter finds her clothes, they both go up to the moon. And the father of Halia says, okay, I'll give you back your mother if you can tell her from her 6 other sisters. And they all had the same face. But of course, Halia's daughter was able to tell who her mother was. That's a psychic link between mother and daughter, right? So, yun.
You're really a storyteller. I mean,
It's a narrative. I use neoclassical style and a narrative way of expressing.
Okay, from Lisa Periquet, not sure if you answered this, but maybe you would like to expound on it. What would you say was Chabet's influence on your art practice?
He, by saying thinking out of the box, he allowed us to play. He said, okay, for this exhibit, maglaro lang kayo. Not to try too hard to give significance to what you're doing. Just laro. Which means tapping into your intuition, not so much your intellect, I guess. That's how So that really helped me because then I didn't have to explain so much. Later, after the artwork comes out, I realized why I did what. But during the process, even after months of research, you just step into this world where you're totally oblivious. You're just holding the plaster, smacking it onto your armature. Everything just goes out through your hands. All the intellectual stuff, forget it. It just comes out into your hands. And I guess my nature. What?
So playing, no?
Chabet, laro. Yeah.
So yung MOPA exhibition, that was laro for you, huh? I mean, it was so... how long did you prepare for that exhibit? I'm just wondering, because am I right to say that it's one of your... was it your first major exhibition?
Yeah. No,
And
there
it
were
was...
6 of us. Chabet was given by Arturo Luz the whole space for himself.
Who was
But
director of MOPA, no?
yeah, being Chabet, he gave it to 6 of us, his students, and I was the only female in the group, no. You know.
How long did you prepare for that?
How long?
Ano? Kasi ang dami, parang it's several works eh.
I think mga 6 months lang yun eh.
Wow.
That's where I relied heavily on live casting. That's like photocopying. Imagine if you had to model all of that in clay. It would take years. Years. But I think we had less than a year or a year. I remember more than 6 months, maybe. And I needed, one of my teachers, Phyllis Zaballera, would always say to us, don't worry about it. You can always hire a muscle. So, of course, I had assistants. Otherwise, I couldn't do others. To cast me, I cannot cast me, no? Except for casting my boobs. I could do that myself.
Yeah. Also, I'd like to note that I remember talking to a few younger artists, and I think Kawayan de Gia was one of those artists who you mentored, no? I mean, I know that he assisted you in some projects.
He and Datu, my nephew, Datu Arellano,
Mm-mm.
they both lent a hand in
Mm.
finishing Lola, the
Okay.
third of the Buddha Mother. So yeah, in
And
that way they worked in my studio.
mm-mm. And that was also an important, I'm sure it's an important phase for younger artists, no?
Yes.
Having to work with someone like you who's quite established and going through a very parang close, intimate, no? Working relationship. Okay. Well, it's a comment from Robert Alejandro. Again, this isn't a question. I saw Agnes's work when I was very young. I instantly became a fan and follower. Thank you, Agnes, with much love and admiration. Sarah Gerber, would you consider making a documentary? Your explanation of your art is so insightful and enlightening, and each piece is a testament and product of their time and circumstances. Would you consider? But well, let's promote na rin the book. Yeah, we have the book. I think this was published. Sorry, kailan nga to? 2008. No, 12 years na pala to. And this actually comes with a CD of the sound that accompanies some of the works. Okay. Hannah Nario Lopez, I watched the presentation with my 6-year-old daughter, Telea, and thank you so much for opening our conversation about the power of the feminine. This presentation also reaffirmed me that there is strength in coming into terms with vulnerabilities. A very important lesson we are forced to realize in these times. So thank you, Hannah, for that comment. Is there a short course? Maria Edna Santiago, is there a short course in sculpture? I don't think there is such a short course. It's a lifelong process, I think.
Of course, you could probably something with clay.
Oh, see, Robert daw will also be interested in this. So maybe actually what you can do, Agnes, you can record yourself in Zoom. While making those small sculptures. That would be a good parang material that you can share. Okay.
I think Boots actually, when we still had the exhibit that people could visit, I remember talking with Agnes, and one of the things we were playing around with was maybe you doing a demonstration of casting.
Yeah, we were thinking of that.
Kaya lang hindi na natuloy.
Women's Month, we were gonna cast whoever.
Baka pwede next Women's Month. Okay. Karine, wait, sorry. I got lost now with the find your. Okay. Alan Zedrick Kamiling, I find your works very stunning, and since I was young, I enjoy writing about, studying them, especially Carcass cornucopia. In terms of medium and technique, do you plan on veering away from your usual for your forthcoming projects? I think in terms of medium and technique, yeah.
Well, I still have to do the same, use the same medium and style and my body mold for Pleiades, the Pleiades project. Because they have to be, they have to have the same face as the miracles, the stories dates to me.
So, sorry, go.
I have used other mediums. No, it's not always using plaster as clay. I also did dead trees. That's my suplicante from Return to the Goddess.
You were saying you used dead trees. Yes, I remember that work. I love that work.
No, somebody asked if I was always doing human figures. Yeah, that's the neoclassical and the narrative approach. But I have this other approach, dead trees, where I salvage trees cut down in construction sites and I embellish them, make them look beautiful, and for one last time to remind people of what we have done to nature. It's an indictment of what we have done to nature. Look at our trees. And so like one of the trees was found by Billy when they were doing the fort, there was a tree that looked like a portal to the beyond. It had been hit by lightning,
Yeah.
so its inside was all black. And it seemed like if you entered it, you'd go into a different world. So we asked for this. He needed a death certificate before he
For
was
the
allowed
tree.
to pull it out.
Okay.
So he produced a death certificate from a DNR to attest that the tree was indeed dead. So we could pull it out. So tinamaan ng kidlat. That was just one show of that one big log. And the inside of it, I gilded with different shades of red. Red gold, yellow gold, all kinds of gold. And then I torched the outside with blowtorch to blacken the whole thing. And Billy had the band Pinipik, and then one of their dancers was Asha Perry. We made her up in gold, and she rose up from the hollow of the log, while Carol was chanting lupa, hangin, and calling all the elements in nature. This was a mixed media, right?
Yeah. Was that the same tree that you exhibited? Was it in Ayala Museum, the old Ayala Museum? And that's a different work from the one that was cast in lead or lined in lead. Or is it the same one? It's the same one.
Different.
Okay, different. Okay.
Because that one had a hollow that hollowed out by lightning. The dead tree with the duhat.
Yeah.
Was hauled out from one of the construction sites, and one of my students didn't want to use it because it had some defects. It wasn't good for a carver. But it looked like a body, like a human body. So, and it was a duhat. And duhat, the bark of the duhat was used in ancient times as medicine. So I took lead, which is poison, and made it the bark. And with this juxtaposition of poison and medicine, the message of the duhat came out. She looked like a cocktail singer in her silver gown.
Where is that work now? The tree lined with lead. Is it still with you?
The original one is with me, but when Billy went to Brisbane for the
Triennale.
Yeah, the Triennale. They had 5 smaller trees that had been culled from eucalyptus. The 5 smaller type culled from eucalyptus.
Okay.
It didn't have the same power, but the lead gave it without the look of the trunk. The lead still gave it some power appeal.
A comment and question from Karina Bolasco, the director of Ateneo Press. Your relationship with art has been forged by so many experiences, personal and political. But has this pandemic changed, again, the way you look at the role of art to its community?
The role of art?
To its community. Or maybe your art practice.
I think maybe whatever message I get about the lockdown will come out with the next Goddess Pleiades project. I haven't really put my thoughts together. I'm still locked down in this lockdown. Well,
Sige,
I really don't know what that's going to be.
No definite answer yet.
No, this technology definitely will. I will have to brush up on computer work.
We'll help you. Don't worry. We can help you do that video. Karina also made a comment thanking us. It's a precious new way of experiencing art. While I miss the physical energy, the intimacy of this personalized tour of decades of amazing art by the artist herself is a fantastic way of engaging with art. And Agnes' stories, though not new, are so intimately told that they now acquire a new register. So thank you for that, Karina. Monette Dator, again, thank you for answering my previous question. And then another question: of all your artworks in the exhibit, which one would you identify as your most challenging to complete and why? Among the works that are on exhibit here.
Yeah, it was from the mere hanging down of my body. It would
So
have
it's
the carcass cornucopia.
Carcass, yep.
And the pain, there was so much pain that
Mm.
needed to be expressed
Yeah.
in that work.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, so that's the one.
And you did mention that part of the process preparing for that work, you had to visit slaughterhouses, or at least a slaughterhouse. Is that right?
Just photos.
Just photos. Okay.
Just to show the disgorgement.
Mm. Mm-mm. From Jasper De Leon, he's the art coordinator for the senior high. High school here in Ateneo, and we've been working with him also to develop learning modules. So what recommendations could you give to budding artists in reference to how to finance their art? Yes.
That's hard to answer because
I
when
know.
I first started doing art, I never knew. I didn't even think of an art market. I didn't
Mm-mm.
know that I had to think about it.
Mm-mm.
So my advice to students would be true to your vision. You have to
Mm-hmm.
have a vision. You cannot just make pretty things. You have to have a vision and you have to be true to it. So it has to come from deep inside you, not just some cosmetic,
Mm-mm.
superficial stuff.
And the public will respond to it, no, regardless of whether, I mean, it's not just about selling. A comment and a question from Lee Pahe.
I
Thank you
need
for being so generous and open in sharing your practice and personal story. Seeing and hearing about the breadth and depth of your work is truly inspiring. What advice can you give young women artists?
highly. We were together in Lawas. She and Mark were the
Christine.
other artists in Lawas at the UP.
Okay, right.
Lipa.
Mm-mm, mm-mm.
What advice would I give? Be brave. Don't be intimidated when
Mhm,
people try to put you down just because you're a woman.
mhm.
There's power. There's equal power, except in the
Yeah,
different form.
and use it, no?
Yeah, you just have to remain undaunted.
Mm-mm. Did you experience any discrimination when you were starting as an artist, as a woman at that? Do you remember?
Well, apart from that man putting
Mm-mm.
paper napkin on my groin. No, but as a child, I
Mm-mm.
was already 4 when my name became changed to Dea, just because my brother was born. He was born and they called him Deo Gracia.
Deo.
Thanks be to God, we can now stop having children because we have a boy.
Oh, okay.
Called him Deo, and then they started calling me Dea. It's like I lost my identity.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
But no, I quickly got over that. In
Yeah,
fact, that's
but
why I use
still, I mean,
Dea for
mm-mm.
the self-portrait.
Mm-mm.
Um, discrimination, maybe oppression. There was one time I was going to the grotto in Pinaglabanan.
Mm-hmm.
And to offer flowers to the Virgin, and the priest stopped me and my friend. That was very cruel. And I thought, I don't like that. That's part of my experiences. Anyway. It had to be a priest.
Okay. From Thea Bersa Santos is asking, where is the book available? Well, you can actually the Agnes's book, we do have copies here in Ateneo Art Gallery. If you want, you can send us an email, or you can check artbooks.ph. They also have, they do have copies of your book, no, Agnes? Sila Ringo. Okay, Mel, a comment from Mel Gadi. Sculpture involves some engineering because you work in 3 dimensions. How do you handle the engineering aspects of sculpture? Intuition, or do you do some calculations?
I'm very bad at numbers, so I don't calculate. Yeah, intuition. It's like, for example, hanging upside down. How would you exhibit it without, how would you exhibit it except to employ rope or, so with this I used, deliberately got slaughterhouse hooks, which added the effect of meat. And then the Pleiades project, it was simple enough to put just steel underneath and a steel plate, which was heavy enough to hold the goddesses up. It's common sense. I didn't have.
I think it's more intuitive, intuitive in your on your part. No, I remember we had to do some problem solving when we were figuring out how thick the wood should be for the carcass cornucopia, or also when we mounted the same work at the CCP in 2012, which had to be hanged from the ceiling. Yeah, I remember. Okay. Sorry. Father Jason is here. Hi, Father. Thank you for sharing with us your creative practice that explores the various Oriental spiritualities in making sense of our life situations. I wonder how the goddesses you have met in your journey inform your life right now during this pandemic. Do you have also a sense in terms of the role of spirituality in the new normal brought about by the said pandemic? I guess it's also a way of asking, how are you coping with this, with the pandemic? You know, has the spirituality that you've developed as a person, as an artist, helped you cope with it?
My partner and I do Tai Chi, which is a form of moving meditation. It's physical, but also spiritual, because you're actually meditating. No? So that's how we're coping with this pandemic. In terms of spirituality, for example, among the Pleiades, there's Kali. No, instead of tongue, I gave her fangs to keep reminding of us that the bloodthirstiness. Kali was a manifestation of Durga, and the male gods could not cope with this monster. There was a monster that was going around. Every time they killed it, each drop of blood from this monster would become another monster. So Kali with her tongue would sweep up all of this. And that was how they got rid of that pandemic.
I wish we have Kali around, no? Ano yan? What are they?
There
The
was no
vaccine.
bloodshed by lapping up the germs, the monsters. It was unable to reproduce.
Okay. So just a comment, the comment from Evely Delfino Sales Posh.
Oh,
think
she's quite
she's a friend. Hi, Ag, no question, but sending you kudos. Though my immersion into goddess spirituality began before we met, you certainly were a great influence in my music and healing ministry. And by the way, it's almost 1 a.m. where she is right now. Robert Alejandro again comments, be true to your vision. Amen. A question from Katrina Santiago. One of the things that resonate with me as a writer, critic, and feminist with Arellano's work is how the power of it, whether female, feminine, or feminist, is just woman in this very basic, even base sense of babae. How does the local sense of kababaihan, of pagkababae, work with the foreignness of the deities that she works with? Where does the local lie, other than in the artist herself locating herself here? So I think that the main question, how does the local sense of kababaihan, of pagkababae, work with the foreignness of the deities that she works with?
Mibuyan is not foreign.
Yeah.
She's ours.
Mm-hmm.
Bagobo. It's not the foreignness of. It's not that the foreign identity that matters. It's the archetypal level that we're talking about. So,
Mm-hmm.
in that level, there's no nationality.
Yeah.
It's universal.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I hope to appeal, not just to the local, because it's way deeper inside our spirit to look for that instead of getting Melchora Aquino.
Yeah.
For example, it doesn't go deep enough for me.
Yeah, I think you, in a way, you answered that earlier. No, you deal with the archetypes that have a more universal and therefore can also be relevant to the Philippine experience.
I'm trying to get away from the polarities. One of my problems is this dual mind.
Mm-hmm.
It's what we have to transcend. To be human, not to be male or female, but to be human. But in expressing my femininity, I'm just expressing why I feel not included sometimes. What I'm going for is inclusivity. So I try to veer away from that male, female nationality. Of course, it comes out, no?
Yes, Isa, you.
Yeah, because someone earlier mentioned the idea of a documentary, and then there were questions about how she prepares for creating certain works. So earlier this year, during the exhibit, Agnes also donated some materials to the Library of Women's Art, Women's Writings, and I think that's very important kasi nga, no history, no documentation. So that's the whole reason for the archive. So one of my questions is, Agnes, how did you choose what documents or materials to donate initially as part of your collection in ALiWW? So if I recall, what you included in the box you gave us, you had the notebook, you had, I think, a few write-ups, typewritten of some of the works, and maybe some copies of the magazine that you used to produce in Pinaglabanan. Yeah. So how did you select that this will go into the first box?
I had a hard time.
Maraming pagpipilian kasi.
Kasi yung art and life, there's, as I said in my practice, the distinction is blurred. So my notebooks have pay so and so for the week, buy groceries. Sometimes
The
all
necessities.
notebooks are devoted to etching hexagrams. And I'm having problems with my mate, for example. I turn to the etching and I write down the lesson it's giving me. So I don't think I should put that in the archive because it's very personal. it's quite hard. I think for some of the ones that I will be giving to you, I will just take out pages when there are confessions about romantic problem that I'm having. I'll just,
Okay.
Yeah, but thank you, and for those watching, so the Library of Women's Writings is part of the special collections of the Rizal Library, but it's open to researchers. Although of course now service is limited while we're on lockdown, but we can answer queries online. And once we're open again, we'd be happy for you to come and visit and see what we have about these women.
Yeah. And Isa, you scan the materials, no?
Yes.
Oh, so that
So
could be
we can,
accessed eventually.
yes, we can digitize them. And in fact, I think because of this documentation, it's been very helpful in retrospective exhibits, for instance. Just recently, like you had that organized that exhibit with Aussie, and then this one later this year also with the CCP with Imelda Kahit and
Yeah.
Kaya. And so these become resources that can
Yes.
be accessed for those kinds of activities. So
yeah, I
Agnes,
also focus
yeah,
pala on research.
yes,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we don't really have enough time to go through the. I can tell how interesting it would be to go through the notes,
yeah,
your notebooks, no. Di bali na yung ano, yung mga grocery list.
yeah. So the
And,
background of Agnes now is actually some of the
yes.
stuff that's in her notebooks.
Yeah. So I think well it's 4:01. So thank you, Agnes and Isa, for this lively discussion, and thank you to everyone, especially those who sent their comments and questions. Lilo, actually, Agnes saying congratulations, gratuliem. Agnes, I'm a fan forever. Sorry, bad French. So before we end this ArtSpeak session, we would like to thank, of course, Agnes Arellano and her partner, Billy Bonavie, for working with us on this project, because this is the closing, technically the closing of her Inscapes exhibition. To Isa Nazareno and the team of ALiWW for organizing the exhibit Sacred Feminine.
Thank you.
Also, we thank Carlo Dawana for helping us organize a Sculpture Speak event last November, and to the creative writing students who really made very interesting and it was a very lively poetry reading session we had that, last year. And special mention goes to Kevin Castro, one of the poets and also an information design major here in Ateneo, who designed the zine. We acknowledge the support of Ignacio Jimenez and the assistance of John Katindig for this program. And to the Dream List team, the team that we work with for our website and for the virtual tour that we showed earlier, they'll be tweaking a bit more, but it will you can access it through our website. So we are in the process of preparing more of this mode of access to Ateneo Art Gallery, our past, ongoing, and future programs. So please check our website, Facebook page, and our Instagram account for further updates. And so with that, we end this first ArtSpeak Online session. Our next sessions will actually be sometime in late July or early August. We'll be doing 2 panel sessions with photographers, the artists who are part of the Not Visual Noise exhibition, also cut short because of the quarantine. And another ArtSpeak with Charlie Ko, sometime in maybe around September. So with that, we thank everyone. Thank you, Agnes and Isa, again. And good afternoon to all. We hope to see you again in our next ArtSpeak. Bye.
Thanks, Agnes. Bye.
Ganun daw. Clap. Thanks.